Welcome to Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnem. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Asian, Canadian, Australian and African channels, and of course news agencies AFP, AP and Reuters. Now the headlines. In Trump hush money case, Michael Cohen has been grilled by the prosecution. President Biden raises tariff on Chinese imports. A law in Georgia, a setback to democracy. 8 people killed in bus crash in central Florida. Severe storms in southern states of USA. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Ukraine to show support for Ukraine. French support for Ukraine war. Russia attacked Ukraine's second largest city. A drug dealer escaped in northwestern France. UN report 500,000 Palestinians displaced in Gaza in recent days. Harvard University will consider its investment in Israel. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industrial increase, S&P 500 increased, and Nasdaq also increased. Now the news headlines. Rather, news details. Writer Alice Munro has died.
On this Tuesday night, frayed nerves over raging wildfires.
Just constantly scared, really.
The new local states of emergency and evacuation orders. A notorious murderer's secret prison transfer. Why the Correctional Service didn't want Canadians to know about Luca Magnotta's move to medium security. A Global News investigation. A trade war charges up over the electric vehicle industry. The potential impact on Canada. And remembering the master of the short story.
I knew I had to do something about what I found in life around me.
Canadian Alice Munro's journey to Nobel-winning author.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. The massive fire that forced almost 5,000 people from a northern BC town exploded in size overnight. But what a difference a day can make. Despite the Parker Lake wildfire burning on the doorstep of Fort Nelson, rain is providing a moment of reprieve. There's hope favorable weather conditions, like a change in wind direction, will keep the fire at bay.
When I can see that flag go in that direction, that's the direction that, honestly, we really want that fire, at least the Parker Lake fire, to move. Now, definitely not a downpour, but a steady little sprinkle right now.
Another wildfire in BC's north forced the evacuation of an entire First Nation today, showing just how quickly things can change. And tonight, hundreds of people in Fort McMurray, Alberta are being ordered out as a wildfire moves closer. Misu Garcha reports on the early start to the fire season.
A rapidly growing blaze threatening the Fort Nelson, BC region has so far stayed away from the outskirts of the town and the neighboring First Nation. The regional mayor says weather conditions have improved.
Actually, tiny bit of rain. About 50 people who have chosen to stay and look after their own properties. We're not out of the woods yet.
Just constantly scared.
Evacuees like Erica Biddlecombe are in an anxious waiting game in long lineups at a reception center in Fort St. John, BC Tuesday to renew evacuee services like accommodations.
You're just on edge all the time because you're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Biddlecombe was pet sitting for a family who was traveling overseas when the evacuations came down on Friday. She quickly packed up what she could and left the community in an RV with her parents.
Between the 3 of us, there was 9 dogs and 2 cats between 3 campers.
Another wildfire north of Fort St. John also prompting evacuations in Doig River First Nation.
There was a grass fire earlier, and it just totally escalated. It started the night before, and then the winds picked up and it just got out of control.
We will continue to look to our federal partners as well to provide us with the support that we need to battle these fires. The drought is remarkable. The risk is very real.
In Alberta, the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo has declared a state of local emergency.
The wind is pushing it towards the town of Fort McMurray. We're seeing extreme fire behavior. Firefighters have been pulled from the fire line for safety reasons.
Rain could help crews contain a wildfire about 16 kilometers southeast of Fort McMurray, as an out-of-control wildfire in the Grand Prairie area has grown to more than 1,300 hectares. In northwest Manitoba, the premier taking a tour of an area hit by a large lightning-caused wildfire. Driven by winds and dry conditions, it forced hundreds to leave Cranberry Portage over the weekend. As the country's wildfire season is off to a troubling pace. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Now to a Global News exclusive and the controversial transfer of murderer Luca Magnotta to a medium security prison. Tonight, we're learning Correctional Service Canada instructed staff to keep quiet over the transfer 2 years ago. The organization says it's policy not to announce prison transfers. Taria Isri joins us now with more details. Taria?
Carolyn, Luca Magnotta is one of Canada's most notorious murderers. Magnotta was transferred from a maximum to medium security prison on August 11th, 2022. 3 days earlier, Correctional Service Canada instructed staff not to inform the public about the move, and as a result, the transfer did not come to light for nearly 2 years. A Correctional Service Canada staff member sent an email on August 8th, 2022 with talking points. We do not announce transfers as we don't disclose the location of offenders. If asked, we would advise media that the Privacy Act does not allow us to speak about specific offenders' cases. Magnotta is serving an indeterminate life sentence for murdering and dismembering international student June Lin in 2012. Magnotta was moved to Lamakaza, northwest of Montreal, the same medium security prison serial killer Paul Bernardo was also transferred to. In both cases, government officials said privacy laws prevented them from releasing information.
We're talking about prisoners who have committed horrendous crimes but their rights are protected like any other citizen.
Canada's former correctional investigator says there's room for more transparency.
Explain the law. Explain why the law is the way it is. Explain what those principles are based on.
The Correctional Service said in a statement to Global News it takes privacy concerns very seriously and that the system is based on rehabilitation, even for offenders who remain incarcerated for the rest of their lives. Carolyn?
Daria Isri in Ottawa, thank you. Saskatchewan RCMP say they have laid 60 charges against a 47-year-old man in relation to an historic child sexual assault investigation. Richard Dyke was an Air Cadet instructor and operated a home-based daycare. And warning, some of the details are disturbing.
The magnitude of this investigation has proven significant. Investigators have analyzed over 1.5 million pieces of digital evidence. They were obtained from 24 terabytes of seized electronic devices.
The charges against Dyke date back to 2005 and are alleged to have continued until 2020. He was arrested in November following a report of alleged historical sexual assault against 3 boys under the age of 12. Since then, RCMP have identified an additional 29 victims, all youths, with the youngest being just 18 months old. Dyke faces charges of sexual assault, voyeurism, and multiple counts of making child pornography. Ontario has announced strict new penalties in an effort to combat auto theft. Doug Ford's Conservative government announced the new legislation today, which would suspend or even permanently revoke the driver's license of violent auto thieves.
This includes a lifetime license suspension for convicted auto thieves from ever driving again upon a third conviction, with 10 to 15-year suspensions for first and second convictions after serving sentences under the criminal code.
The legislation will be tabled Thursday and is expected to pass easily given the Progressive Conservatives' majority in Ontario's legislature. Home to just under 20,000 people, Port Colborne, Ontario is set to become a key part of Canada's multi-billion-dollar electric vehicle supply chain. As part of Honda Canada's plan to build EVs in the province, the community on Lake Erie has been chosen as the future site of a first-of-its-kind lithium-ion separator plant. The news is being celebrated by the industry, but as Mike Drolet reports, the announcement comes in the shadow of what many fear is an escalating and volatile trade war.
Another week, yet another auto investment announcement in Ontario.
Thank you, Minister Champion.
There have been so many, politicians have begun recycling their jokes.
How many times have we said game changer now, week after week, month after month?
The $1.6 billion IKC-owned plant will produce components for Honda's Alliston battery plant, which we've known for weeks. What's new is the location. Port Colborne, Ontario, a town of 18,000 on the north shore of Lake Erie that hadn't seen an investment this large since the International Nickel Company opened a plant in 1914.
This is on that scale, actually quite larger than that scale.
The announcement comes on the same day U.S. President Joe Biden announced heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, as well as batteries and the critical minerals that go in them, in an attempt to prevent less expensive Chinese cars from flooding the market.
Obviously, we're watching closely what our closest trading partner in the United States is doing.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sidestepped several questions on the subject, but industry watchers expect Canada to follow suit.
Canada cannot afford to be known in Washington as the open side door for the Chinese.
The danger here is that a trade war could potentially lead to geopolitical supply chain issues. Last fall, for example, China declared that some graphite exports would require government approval. Will they now do the same with other critical minerals?
Right now, if you want lithium, if you need graphite, if you need cobalt and manganese, you're going to get it from Chinese sources.
It takes at least a decade for a mine to begin extracting materials like lithium from the ground. Until then, the 4 new EV plants being built in Ontario and Quebec, along with the supply plant announced today, will have to import everything they need, while a trade war revs up. Mike Drolet, Global News, Port Colborne, Ontario.
A massive billboard collapsed during a rainstorm in India, killing at least 14 people and injuring dozens of others. The 30-meter-tall sign crashed through the roof of a Mumbai gas station yesterday, where more than 100 people were sheltering from the storm. There are reports the billboard may have been installed illegally. The deputy chief minister of the region has ordered an inquiry. Testimony from Donald Trump's former lawyer coming up, what he was constantly urged not to do. In Baltimore, investigators looking into the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge say the cargo ship lost power hours before leaving port. According to a preliminary report, the cargo vessel experienced a blackout while undergoing maintenance about 10 hours before it left the port. A crew member mistakenly closed an exhaust damper. The report also says the ship lost power 2 more times as it approached the bridge. 6 construction workers were killed. In New York, Donald Trump's lawyers have begun their cross-examination of star witness Michael Cohen. Trump's former attorney and fixer placed the ex-president at the center of an alleged hush money scheme aimed at buying and suppressing negative stories ahead of the 2016 election. As Jackson Prosko reports, the case could soon be turned over to the jury.
Back on the stand, Michael Cohen testified about how and why payments were made to adult film star Stormy Daniels, recounting a 2017 meeting inside the Oval Office with then-President Trump, where he says he discussed his reimbursement for the payment he made to Daniels. Cohen testified he created bogus monthly invoices and received 11 checks totaling $420,000 from Trump. After Cohen became the target of an FBI raid in 2018, he testified Trump reassured him. He said to me, "Don't worry, I'm the president of the United States. There's nothing here. Everything's going to be okay. Stay tough. You're going to be okay."
So I just heard that they broke into the office of one of my personal attorneys.
He said he felt he had a secret back channel to the president through a lawyer and was regularly urged not to flip on his former boss. In linchpin testimony key to the allegations of election interference, Cohen was asked why he paid the $130,000 to Daniels in the first place. Cohen said, to ensure that the story would not come out, would not affect Mr. Trump's chances of becoming president of the United States. Asked to confirm on whose direction and behalf he made the payment, Cohen said, on behalf of Mr. Trump. Under cross-examination, Trump's defense sought to shred Cohen's credibility, painting him as disgruntled and money-hungry. They questioned him about his frequent scathing remarks about Trump on social media. Cohen testified about his past, confirming he was once knee-deep into the cult of Trump, but changed his views by 2019. He also confirmed prosecutors have repeatedly asked him to stop talking about the case in public. Cohen is expected to be the prosecution's final witness, and it's not clear if Trump's defense will call anyone to the stand, meaning that this case could be in the hands of the jury as early as next week. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Frito-Lay Canada is recalling 2 popular snacks due to risk of salmonella contamination. Harvest Cheddar flavored Sun Chips and Munchies Original Snack Mix are affected. A seasoning supplier notified Frito-Lay Canada that an ingredient provided to it by a third party was potentially contaminated with salmonella. Recalled products with a guaranteed fresh date of July 16 through August 13 should be thrown out. Outrage in Georgia ahead. The controversial bill sparking protests across the country.
तो आपको पता है हम मुख्तलिफ परफ्यूम बनाते हैं, मुख्तलिफ परफ्यूम जो है ना वो टेस्ट करते हैं। तो आज हम बड़ी मज़े की कहानी आपको बताने।
The United Nations has identified a staff member killed in Gaza yesterday as an Indian national. The UN says the worker was traveling in a clearly marked vehicle to a hospital near Rafah when it was struck. Another UN staff member was injured. The Israeli military says the incident is under review, adding that an initial investigation showed the vehicle was hit in what it considers an active combat zone. The IDF, meanwhile, has confirmed it was responsible for a deadly strike on a school run by the UN agency. It alleges 15 militants were killed in the strike. An Al Jazeera report says at least 20 people were killed. Neither claim could be independently verified. Thousands of protesters are still on the streets of Georgia tonight after the country's parliament passed a hugely controversial law that's being dubbed the Foreign Agents Bill. Demonstrators say it's inspired by similar repressive legislation in Russia, which requires organizations that receive funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. The former Soviet republic sits on the Black Sea at the edge of Europe and is bordered by Russia. As Redmond Shannon reports, after Belarus and Ukraine, this is yet another Eastern European country that appears to be torn between Moscow and the EU.
Chaos and violence outside Georgia's barricaded parliament, with similar scenes inside too. On a day many in the country fear Georgia is pivoting away from democracy and toward Russia.
We will always fight for our freedom. They will never win. Russia will never take what they want to take away from us, Ukraine or any other country.
Lawmakers eventually passed the so-called Foreign Agent Bill on Tuesday. It would require any organisation that gets more than a fifth of its revenue from abroad to register as bearing the interests of a foreign power. Groups would then be subject to government monitoring. Russia passed a similar law 12 years ago.
And we saw, as a matter of fact, what was the effect of that Russian law back in Russia. It basically curbed all the civil society and free media in the country.
The bill doesn't target Western influence specifically, but crucially, the European Union says the law would harm Georgia's application for membership, something most Georgians aspire to.
It breaches the conditions put for human rights, civil society, free media, and of course political polarization.
Georgia's Prime Minister says the law is about transparency. He and the Kremlin deny accusations of Moscow influence. But the oligarch founder of the governing Georgian Dream Party made his fortune in post-Soviet Russia and has criticized Western influence. Washington has threatened sanctions over the police crackdown against protesters.
We're deeply troubled by Georgia's Kremlin-style foreign agents legislation.
With elections due in October, protesters fear the unpopular government will use the new law to crack down on opposition voices between now and then. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A literary icon. Next, how Alice Munro mastered the art of the short story. Canadian literary powerhouse Alice Munro has died at the age of 92. Munro's short stories earned her an international fan base and a Nobel Prize. She passed away Monday night at her care home in Port Hope, Ontario. Eric Sorensen reports on her life and remarkable achievements.
In Alice Munro's hometown of Wingham, Ontario, at the garden in her name, there's a sculpture, a child with a book. Like Alice herself reading The Little Mermaid that first inspired her to think up her own story with a happier ending than a mermaid who lost the prince.
I walked round and round outside the house, making up a happy ending for the mermaid. She got the prince.
And so began a life of making up stories.
I knew I had to do something about what I found in life around me.
The life around her was rural southwestern Ontario, but the stories and the characters were recognizable to anyone. A career in writing did not happen overnight. Alice moved to Vancouver with her first husband, James Munro, and later they opened a bookstore in Victoria. Her passion, however, was not selling stories, but telling them.
One time she, working on a store, and she said, I can write better than these people. And from then on, she quit the store and stayed home and wrote.
She would return to Huron County, Ontario, the bucolic setting for so many of her fictionalized tales.
I thought that stories are so important in the world, and I want to make up some of these stories, and I want to keep on doing this.
Raising 3 children, Munro didn't have time for anything longer than short stories. Yet for so many readers, they were the perfect length, fleeting, neatly written, and easily read.
He thought maybe she was joking when she proposed to him on a cold, bright day on the beach at Port Stanley.
So it looks very simple. It looks so easy, but it's what comes up underneath, and that you feel as a reader. And that's the sign of a genius.
Munro thought someday she would graduate to full-length novels, but her niche, her gift, was the short story.
You're a great short story writer. If you want to go on writing short stories for the rest of your life, I'll go on publishing them.
Alice Munro is the winner of the 1998 Giller Prize.
Munro was acclaimed and beloved, producing 14 collections that can be found in at least 12 languages.
This is a wonderful moment for me.
She won 3 awards from the Governor-General, 2 Gillers, 1 Booker, and finally, the Nobel Prize.
Canadian author Alice Munro, master of the contemporary short story.
At the time, just the 13th woman in 112 years to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. A small-town Ontario girl who had stories to tell.
I want my stories to move people, that causes people to feel some kind of reward from the writing.
And what reward awaited readers from that proposal on a cold, bright day on the beach at Port Stanley?
Do you think it would be fun if we got married? He took her up on it. He shouted yes. He never wanted to be far away from her. She had the spark of life.
That was in all of Alice Munro's characters, the spark of life, from the modern master of the short story.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Sir Canada is the shipwreck of SS Charcot in Conception Harbour, Newfoundland.
Tonight, breaking news, Donald Trump's criminal trial, his one-time lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen on the stand, and what he revealed, the defense going at him. Also tonight, the horrific bus crash, the bus flipping, at least 8 people killed, and the images coming in now of brazen prison escape. First tonight, Donald Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen testifying about a visit to the Oval Office. Cohen testifying the former president signed off on a plan to reimburse Cohen for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. And tonight here, the defense taking aim at Michael Cohen, what they pressed him on. The images coming in tonight, at least 8 people dead, many others critically wounded in that bus crash in Florida. Authorities say the bus sideswiped by a pickup crossing the center line, careening off the highway. Just in tonight, the new preliminary report on that deadly bridge collapse in Baltimore. What it now reveals about 2 blackouts on that cargo ship hours before it left that port. Several hours later, it was crashing into that bridge. There is a severe storm threat right now as we come on. A confirmed EF2 touching down, and now severe thunderstorms we're watching across several states, pushing right into the northeast. Ginger Z has the new forecast. President Biden taking aim at China. The details tonight: $18 billion in new tariffs on Chinese imports. Among them, quadrupling tariffs on electric vehicles from Chinese automakers. Biden saying he wants the electric vehicles of the world made in America. Tonight, Israel launching intense attacks across Gaza. And this evening, growing concern for about 20 U.S. aid workers. They say they have no safe way out. You'll hear from them right here tonight. The chilling video coming in now: the deadly police ambush in France. Heavily armed gunmen attacking a prison van at a toll booth. At least 2 prison officers killed. What we know so far. Back in the U.S., a major turn to the case of that 15-year-old killed, hit while in the water. Tonight, the news on Red Lobster suddenly closing dozens of restaurants across the U.S. What they're now blaming, was it too much of a good thing? Caitlin Clark making her regular season debut tonight before a sold-out crowd. Also, the cougar scare chasing the family pets and then the family. You'll see it. And America Strong tonight, the season of graduations. But we've never seen one quite like this.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, it's great to have you with us here on a very busy Tuesday night. That horrific and deadly bus crash careening off the highway after being sideswiped. We'll go to the scene in just a moment. But we begin tonight with Donald Trump's criminal trial, his longtime fixer and lawyer Michael Cohen on the stand, what he revealed, and the defense then going at him, the intense cross-examination. Donald Trump arriving at court today, listening to Michael Cohen in that courtroom as his one-time friend and fixer, detailed a meeting in the Oval Office, testifying that Trump signed off on the plan to reimburse Cohen for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. And Cohen testifying that in 2018, when Cohen himself was the target of an FBI raid, Trump, who was president then, told Cohen, "Don't worry, I'm the president of the United States. Stay tough, you're going to be okay." It was the last time they spoke. Here's our senior investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky, leading us off at the courthouse tonight.
On the witness stand today, in vivid detail, Donald Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen described the unraveling of their relationship after the hush money deal with Stormy Daniels and Trump's rise to the White House. Cohen was clear. Trump told him to pay off the porn star so it would not affect Mr. Trump's chances in the 2016 election. Cohen said Trump discussed plans to reimburse him during a meeting in the Oval Office. Jurors seeing this photograph and these checks that allegedly covered part of the reimbursement. Trump is charged with illegally falsifying business documents to make it all look like legal expenses. Cohen admitted even after the election he kept lying again and again to protect Mr. Trump. Stay on message. Demonstrate my continued loyalty. But in April 2018, the lies caught up with him. The FBI raided his hotel room and office. Cohen said he was frightened, but Trump reassured him, "Don't worry, I'm president of the United States. There's nothing here. Everything's going to be okay. Stay tough. You're going to be okay." Cohen said that was the last time he ever spoke with Donald Trump. He ended up pleading guilty to federal campaign finance charges related to the hush money deals with Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal. He served 13.5 months in prison. On cross-examination, defense attorney Todd Blanche cast Cohen as a man now hell-bent on revenge. "You're actually obsessed with President Trump," Blanche said. "I can't recall using that word, but I can't say it would be wrong," Cohen replied. Cohen acknowledged saying he would take a bullet for his old boss, but he described himself as knee-deep in the cult of Donald Trump. Blanche then painted a picture of obsession gone wrong, grilling Cohen about the barrage of insults he's lobbed at Trump on his podcast 6 days a week, his book called Revenge, and the t-shirts he sold, Trump Behind Bars. And asking him bottom line, "You want President Trump to be convicted in this case?" "Yes," Cohen said, "I would like to see that."
I think it was a very, very good day.
Trump had little to say about Cohen's testimony. He's under a gag order, barred from attacking witnesses. In more than 2 hours of cross-examination today, David, the defense assailed Michael Cohen's character. They questioned his motives, but asked nothing about Stormy Daniels or hush money or any of the business records at the heart of the case. And remember, Cohen's the only witness to have testified he spoke directly to Trump about those things. They'll be back here on the witness stand on Thursday, David.
Aaron Katursky leading us off again tonight. Thank you, Aaron. We're going to turn now to the horrific images coming in this evening. A deadly bus crash in Florida. At least 8 killed, many others critically injured. Authorities say the bus was sideswiped by a pickup truck crossing the center line. The bus then careening right off the highway. Late today, the driver of that pickup was arrested and charged. Victor Oquendo is on the scene in Marion County, Florida tonight.
Tonight, the driver of this pickup truck arrested and charged with manslaughter after this mass casualty bus crash on a Central Florida highway that killed at least 8 people.
At this point, we are conducting a massive traffic homicide investigation. We have a full team and then some here on the scene.
This morning, a retired school bus carrying 53 migrant farm workers traveling on State Road 40 in Marion County, a 2001 Ford pickup coming from the opposite direction on the 2-lane highway, then moving towards the center lane, sideswiping the bus.
Post-collision, the school bus traveled off the roadway onto the grass shoulder, where it went through a fence, struck a tree, and overturned.
The bus rolling over, landing on its side, killing 8. First responders pulling out survivors. More than 30 transported to local hospitals, 8 of them in critical condition. The driver of the pickup, identified as 41-year-old Brian McLean Howard, also seriously injured. Tonight, charged with 8 counts of driving under the influence, manslaughter. Cannon Farms, where those workers were headed, closing today out of respect to the losses and injuries. David, that is the pickup truck that was involved. It's been loaded up, about to be towed away. Tonight we're learning that some of the victims were Mexican nationals. The Mexican consulate in Orlando now working on connecting those affected with family. David?
Victor Kendo in Florida, thank you. We turn to the breaking news involving the investigation into that deadly bridge collapse in Baltimore. Late today, the NTSB issuing its preliminary report on the cargo ship that slammed into that bridge. You'll remember video showing the ship appearing to lose power twice, just moments before it brought down the bridge. Well, tonight, the report now revealing that that ship, hours before it even left port, had 2 other major power outages, 2 blackouts. Hours later, crashing into the bridge. Terry Moran on this again tonight.
A new report tonight finding that the massive cargo ship that knocked down the Key Bridge in Baltimore suffered 2 blackouts while undergoing maintenance about 10 hours before that deadly collapse. That preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board concludes that a mistake by a crew member on the Dolly cargo ship caused the first blackout while the ship was docked in port, followed by a second power outage shortly after. The crew then switched the configuration of the electrical system. The Dolly, a 9-year-old ship, left the port of Baltimore hours later and experienced 2 more power failures seen in this video. The main engine shutting down, the crew losing propulsion control of the ship, and just moments before impact, emergency calls went out. The crew tried to drop anchor, but it was too late. The ship hit the pier, toppled the bridge, and killed 6 construction workers and injured 2 others. Now the NTSB is seeking to determine if those in-port blackouts are connected to the power issues the ship experienced just before it hit the bridge. And David, this report also rules out the possibility that contaminated fuel caused the loss of power on that ship. That was one theory. And those crew members, they're still on board. Officials say they're going to move the ship back into the port of Baltimore tomorrow and clear the rest of the wreckage from the channel by the end of the month. David?
Nearly 50 days later, still on board. Terry, thank you again tonight. We're also tracking severe storms on the move as we're on the air here, moving into the northeast, in fact. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z tracking the storms in the hours ahead. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, David. Severe thunderstorms tracking right across the state line of Alabama and Tennessee. Huntsville's getting hit now. Chattanooga, you'll be up next. That goes till 8 p.m. That severe thunderstorm watch. I think it'll extend into the night, so keep an eye if you're anywhere east of there. Tomorrow morning, Tampa, Orlando, also Daytona Beach. Watch for storms all the way through the early afternoon. It's the heavy showers that start to wrap up around the mid-Atlantic and the northeast here, where we've just been inundated, will be also quite blustery as this passes. And then Wednesday, Thursday, we bring back the severe threat for the plains. Also Dallas, one of the wettest years on record to date. They'll be getting a whole lot of rain late this week, David.
We'll see you first thing in the morning on GMA, Ginger. Thank you. Tonight, President Biden taking aim at China. We have the new details here. $18 billion in new tariffs on Chinese imports, among them quadrupling tariffs on electric vehicles from Chinese automakers. The president saying he wants the electric vehicles of the world made in America to protect American jobs. Here's Mary Bruce.
Tonight, President Biden making a play for key swing state voters dependent on the auto industry, quadrupling tariffs on electric vehicles and targeting other imports from China. $18 billion in total in an effort to protect American jobs.
Folks, look, I'm determined that the future of electric vehicles will be made in America by union workers, period.
Biden nodding to workers in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where polls show the race is tight. And Michigan, a crucial battleground where recent polling has Donald Trump up by 7 points.
My predecessor promised to increase American exports and boost manufacturing, but he didn't either. He failed.
Biden once promised to repeal some of Trump's tariffs. Now he's building upon them. The president making the case he's the one who's really tough on China. Trump outside his courtroom on the attack.
They've also got to do it on other vehicles, and they have to do it on a lot of other products, because China's eating our lunch right now.
Biden putting the blame right back on Trump.
We've been beaten a long time.
And David, the president is certainly well aware that China is the leader in the production of electric vehicles. He wants to stop them from flooding the market and create jobs by having them made here in America instead. And he is hoping that will give him a boost in these critical states.
China hard at work on electric vehicles amid all this debate here in the U.S. All right, Mary, thank you. We move on tonight, and we have a developing headline on Israel at this hour. President Biden now set to move forward with $1 billion in new arms for Israel. And this evening, there is growing concern for about 20 U.S. aid workers. They say they have no safe way out of Gaza. You'll hear from them right here tonight. Matt Gutman is back in Tel Aviv.
As Israel launched its most intense air attacks across Gaza in weeks, the harrowing story from 2 of the nearly 20 American aid workers trapped inside Gaza, unable to get out, saying they don't feel safe to leave.
What does it feel like to be marooned in what is essentially a battle zone?
Work. That's what works for me. I try not to think of anything else.
Tonight, our team in Gaza following Dr. Adam Hamawi from New Jersey and Nurse Monica Johnston from Portland, Oregon. The group is scheduled to leave Rafah on Monday.
There's no bed sheets, there's no hand sanitizers, there's no soap. We have almost 100% infection rate because of the conditions we're in.
Tonight, Israel telling ABC News any accredited aid worker can leave or enter Gaza, but the U.S. and aid workers fear there is no guarantee or safe passage. Aid continues to be a flashpoint. Our Marcus Moore in Israel, where protesters continue to swarm Gaza-bound aid trucks.
These people believe that the aid, this critical aid for those who are starving, is falling into the wrong hands. They say the hands of Hamas.
And with casualties mounting, the U.S. says nearly 500,000 Palestinians have fled Rafah, only increasing the need for those crucial supplies.
David, last week the Biden administration suspended a shipment of bombs to Israel that it feared might be used in an incursion into Rafah, which is moments ago we learned that the White House has alerted Congress it's moving forward with a new weapons deal for Israel worth over $1.2 billion. David.
Matt Gutman on that developing headline from Israel tonight. Matt, thank you. Now to the war in Ukraine tonight, where Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made a surprise visit to Kyiv, reiterating that more U.S. military aid is on the way tonight. ABC's James Longman from inside Ukraine.
Tonight, as Russia presses its offensive in the northeast, Secretary of State Blinken in Kyiv as American military aid is rushed to Ukraine.
The assistance is now on the way. Some of it's already arrived, more of it will be arriving, and that's going to make a real difference.
But America's most senior diplomat was also here with a message for U.S. voters in a year where Ukraine spending will be a critical issue.
The American people want to know that we have a plan so that America's support can transition to more sustainable levels.
The latest $60 billion U.S. aid package was passed after months of congressional delay. Ukrainian forces have run low on critical weapons and ammunition, the Kremlin now trying to take advantage of that shortage. And in Russia's sights, Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, home to more than 1 million people, bombarded multiple times today, injuring at least 17.
And Secretary Blinken laid out a plan for how Ukraine could be less reliant on US aid. It includes a path to NATO membership and a way to build up their military so they can stand alone. David?
James Longman with us from Kyiv again tonight. Thank you, James. There's also chilling video coming in from overseas tonight showing the deadly and brazen police ambush in northern France. Here are the pictures. Authorities say 2 prison officers were killed in this, several wounded, when heavily armed gunmen blocked their convoy at a toll booth. Graphic images tonight showing the gunmen firing into the police vans, freeing a kidnapping and homicide suspect who was convicted of burglary last week. There is a massive manhunt now underway in northern France. When we come back here tonight, the major turn, the case of the 15-year-old killed, hit while in the water. The boat, who authorities say kept going. Also news tonight about Red Lobster suddenly closing dozens of restaurants across the U.S. and the reason tonight why they're saying too much of a good thing might be to blame here. And then take a look at this, the cougar scare, chasing the family pets, and then eventually the family too. More on that in a moment.
Yango.
On that in a moment. Tonight, authorities say they have now found the boat involved in that hit-and-run death of a 15-year-old girl in Key Biscayne, Florida. Ella Adler was killed by wakeboarding with friends. She was in the water when authorities say she was struck by the boat. The boat did not stop. Police say the boat's owner is cooperating tonight with this investigation. Tonight, the cougar scare for a family in Monroe, Washington, outside Seattle. The cougar was first seen in home surveillance chasing the family's cats across the backyard there, coming inches away from their young daughter. That daughter, mother, and new puppy then running inside for themselves. The father then chasing away the cougar, making sure all the other pets were okay as well. When we come back here tonight, Red Lobster suddenly closing dozens of restaurants across this country, and a hint tonight at the reason why. To the index of other news tonight, and Red Lobster is now closing dozens of restaurants across the U.S. At least 87 restaurants temporarily closed in 27 states, many not expected to reopen. Red Lobster reporting millions in losses. One reason analysts point to, they had expanded that popular endless shrimp deal. The promotion proved very costly. The WNBA's new season gets underway tonight. Number 1 draft pick Caitlin Clark making her regular season debut with the Indiana Fever, taking on the Connecticut Sun, playing before a sold-out crowd. Tonight's games air on ESPN, ESPN Plus, and Disney Plus. And news on Jason Kelce here tonight. The retired Philadelphia Eagles star retired no more. Kelce signing a multi-year deal to appear on ESPN's Monday Night Countdown, leading into Monday Night Football, of course. Jason Kelce saying he's ready for some football. Welcome to the Disney team. When we come back here tonight, the season of graduations, but we've never seen one quite like this. We think you'll be very impressed.
ABC World News Tonight with David Muir, sponsored by American Home Shield. Be at one with your home systems and appliances. Don't worry, be warranty.
On tonight, the graduation that was a party of 5. Tonight in Montclair, New Jersey, 5 siblings, all making history, graduating together from college. The Poverlo family, they are quintuplets, 3 brothers, 2 sisters, all attending Montclair State University. 5 different degrees. Tonight they have just graduated. The first time in their college's history, quintuplets have graduated together. From left to right, Ludovico, Victoria, Michael, Ashley, and Marcus. Born on the 4th of July, 2002, quite the fireworks, growing up always encouraging each other. The first in their family to go to college, and they went together. And on graduation day, their proud parents, Paul and Sylvia, right there.
Ludovico, Ashley,
all 5 siblings in cap and gown walking across that stage.
Marcus.
Right here tonight.
Hey David, we're the Povolos.
The Povolo family, the ones who are not at work.
My name is Ludovico, I'm a political science major.
I'm Michael, I'm a nutrition and food science major.
I'm Victoria, and my major is biochemistry.
I'm Ashley, I'm an English major.
Their brother Marcus at work, but he got a business degree, and tonight they are all proud of each other.
It feels great, you know what I mean? Graduating my siblings, we put so much work into this.
We held each other accountable, and we just try to get the most achievements as possible together, and we just strive for greatness.
There was a little bit of healthy competition going on, but really it's all about supporting each other, talking, being open. We just made it here all together, which is really awesome.
Just a little competition. Congrats, 5 times over. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, Israeli bombs came down on the Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza overnight, landing on a house and an UNRWA school housing displaced people. At least 14 people were killed, including children. Survivors desperately searched through the rubble for signs of life.
This is madness. They're targeting people, civilians. They have nothing to do with the resistance or with anything. They're children. I swear to God, they're children. She's the friend of my girl. They play together every day.
This is a worker with the UN refugee agency, UNRWA, that was hit in Nusayrat.
It happened around 2:05 a.m. in a place sheltering displaced people. They came to the school to be safe, and the school was hit without any warning. One of the school staff members was martyred, and it seems that there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. There is no power nor strength except with God. This is enough. It's enough. We ask God for safety.
Elsewhere in the Gaza Strip, Israeli ground forces have surrounded evacuation zones and shelters in Jabalia as Israel escalates attacks in the northern region. A new Human Rights Watch report finds Israeli forces have attacked humanitarian aid convoys and buildings at least 8 times since October 7th, despite being given their coordinates and without warning. This comes as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Monday called for a full investigation after a UN aid worker was killed and another injured when their clearly marked vehicle was attacked in Rafah as they traveled to the European hospital. More than 190 UN staff have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. Meanwhile, inside Rafah's European hospital, over 20 U.S. medical volunteers are now reportedly trapped and unable to return home after Israel sealed off the Rafah border crossing last week. Like many Gazans, the U.S. medical workers are now facing dehydration and other deadly health conditions. The Intercept's Ryan Grimm questioned State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel over the fate of the U.S. doctors.
What does it say about conditions more generally in Rafah and in Khan Yunis? American doctors who only arrived there recently are already suffering from dehydration and malnutrition.
So, look, we have not been unambiguous about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It is a crisis. No amount of humanitarian aid at this moment is enough.
The State Department spokesperson also criticized Israeli settlers who were seen in a video blocking a Jordanian aid convoy headed toward Gaza, throwing food into the road and setting fire to vehicles at the Tarkumia checkpoint near Hebron in the occupied West Bank. As the death toll in Gaza tops 35,000, Palestinians mourned Monday the killing of Hasham Hazel, a disability rights advocate who was known as Gaza's godfather of the deaf. Hasham Hazel was killed in an Israeli airstrike along with his wife. They had 9 children. 7 of them were reportedly severely injured in the strike. A U.S. Army officer working at the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, has resigned to protest what he called the United States' unqualified support for Israel's war on Gaza. Major Harrison Mann wrote in a post online that the U.S. has, quote, enabled and empowered the killing and starvation of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians. He went on to write, quote, as a descendant of European Jews, I was raised in a particularly unforgiving moral environment when it came to the topic of bearing responsibility for ethnic cleansing. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz is reporting at least 10 Israeli officers and soldiers have died by suicide since October 7th. The total number of suicides is likely even higher, since the list does not include soldiers who died after they were discharged. Michael Cohen took the stand Monday in Donald Trump's criminal election interference trial and testified that Trump, his former boss, instructed him to make a $130,000 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in order to protect his 2016 presidential run. The arrangement, which was made between Cohen, Trump, and then Trump Organization CFO Alan Weiselberg, included a plan to reimburse Cohen for the payment, which involved falsifying business documents by classifying them as legal expenses, falsely claiming they were payments to Cohen for his services as Trump's, quote, personal lawyer. Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer, told the court Trump said, quote, women will hate me. This is going to be a disaster for the campaign, unquote. Cohen also said, quote, he wasn't thinking about Melania. This was all about the campaign, unquote. According to Cohen, Trump also urged him to drag out negotiations with Daniels past the November election, saying, quote, if I win, it has no relevance because I'm president, and if I lose, I don't really care, Trump said. Democratic senators say it's highly likely they'll investigate the former president following reports that Trump told oil executives he would enact environmental policy rollbacks in exchange for $1 billion in campaign contributions. Trump reportedly made the offer at a dinner at Mar-a-Lago last month. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's in Ukraine on a surprise visit in his first trip to Kyiv since Congress approved $61 billion in additional military aid to Ukraine. Blinken's trip comes days after Russia launched a new ground offensive targeting Ukraine's Kharkiv region. In Australia, former military lawyer and whistleblower David McBride was sentenced to over 5 years in prison for sharing classified material about Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. The sentencing comes 7 years after ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, published the leaked information in a report called the Afghan Files. In related news, a court in London is expected to rule next Monday on whether to accept U.S. government assurances that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will receive First Amendment protections if extradited to the U.S. and put on trial for espionage, and that he won't be executed if found guilty. In Brazil, the death toll from ongoing flooding in Rio Grande do Sul has reached 147. Over 100 people are missing. 500,000 others have been displaced. Authorities warn more floods and landslides could be on their way as rain continues to plague the southern state. This is a resident in one of the stricken towns.
I'll be quite honest, I think that in the future, Musum will become a river. This flood left a lot of soil, a lot of sand, took a lot of trees into the town. We really have to think that this is going to be very difficult for us to live here.
Climate protesters disrupted the Italian Open on Monday. Members of the group Last Generation poured white paint and threw confetti on the tennis court during a match, while other activists cemented their feet to the stands. The action comes as Italy is facing a major drought. Back in the U.S., over 5,000 workers at 2 Mercedes-Benz plants in Alabama are voting this week on whether to join the United Auto Workers Union. Workers say Mercedes has repeatedly engaged in union busting, and Republican leaders, including Governor Kay Ivey, have also tried to stymie their efforts. But UAW says it believes workers will prevail as it hopes to see its second major victory in the South since Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga, Tennessee, voted overwhelmingly last month to join the union. Last night, workers of the Hyundai plant in Alabama joined Reverend William Barber's Moral Monday Mass in Montgomery to push their own union campaign.
We give our all to the company, but we have no pension, no retiree, no health care. This is just wrong, and we're going to try to make things right. That's right. When we win our union.
And in other labor news, unionized workers at the University of California have begun voting to authorize a strike to protest the violent crackdown on Gaza encampments at UCLA and other UC campuses. The UAW said, quote, our members have been beaten, concussed, pepper sprayed, both by counter-protesters and by police forces, unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is on assignment. On the NewsHour tonight, the prosecution's star witness Michael Cohen is grilled by the defense in former President Trump's hush money trial. President Biden raises tariffs on Chinese imports to protect strategic U.S. industries. And ignoring massive protests, Georgia's parliament enacts a law that opponents say sets back democracy.
The consequences of this law will be very, very bad for Georgia, for the civil society of Georgia, for the opposition of Georgia.
Major funding for the PBS News.
Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. The key witness in the Manhattan criminal trial against former President Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, continued his testimony today, further detailing the alleged scheme to hide the payment that Cohen made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels to protect candidate Trump back in 2016. But during cross-examination, Trump's legal team painted Cohen as a man motivated by greed, determined to convict Trump no matter what. William Brangham was in court again today and joins us now from downtown Manhattan. I'm reporting live once again from New York for us. William, thank you.
Thanks so much.
In the day's other headlines, at least 8 people were killed and dozens injured in a bus crash in Central Florida. Officials say 53 farm workers were aboard, headed to work, when their bus collided with a truck, swerved off the road, and landed on its side. A Florida Highway Patrol official said it could take months to determine exactly what caused the accident.
At this point, we are conducting a massive traffic homicide investigation. We have a full team and then some here on the scene. This will be a very long and lengthy and thorough investigation. We do not get in a hurry to conclude what happened until we have all the facts.
The driver of the other vehicle involved in the collision was also hospitalized with serious injuries. At least 3 people have been killed in severe storms across a number of southern states. In Louisiana, tornadoes toppled power lines on Monday night and flipped cars upside down. The region had already suffered weather-related damage this spring in one of the most active periods for tornadoes on record. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine to show support for the country's war against Russia. He is the first U.S. official to visit since Congress passed a $61 billion aid package last month. Blinken met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today. He promised that American arms will help beat back Russian advances.
The assistance is now on the way. Some of it's already arrived. More of it will be arriving. And that's going to make a real difference against the ongoing Russian aggression on the battlefield. And we're determined, along with many other partners for Ukraine, to make sure that you succeed on the battlefield.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron announced today that he will send a new military aid package to Ukraine in the coming weeks. Russia struck the center of Ukraine's second largest city today, part of an increase of attacks. Authorities in Kharkiv say at least 17 people were injured when a high-rise residential building was hit. A fire broke out at the scene of another strike. Police carried out more evacuations of the region and say more than 7,500 people have fled so far. A manhunt is underway in northwestern France after a brazen ambush of a prison convoy that killed 2 guards and injured 3 others. Authorities say a drug dealer known as The Fly was being transported to jail when his van came under attack, as seen in this CCTV footage. He escaped and the assailants are at large. Hundreds of police officers are investigating the scene. France's prime minister vowed to bring justice.
Tout sera mis en œuvre.
Everything will be done to find the perpetrators of this despicable crime. We will spare no effort, no means. We will track them down. We will find them, and they will pay.
Officials say the escaped prisoner was recently convicted of burglary and is under investigation for a kidnapping and homicide case. In the Middle East, the United Nations says more than 500,000 Palestinians have been displaced in recent days as Israel escalates attacks on both ends of the Gaza Strip. Most people are fleeing Rafah in the south, where Israel is targeting the last Hamas stronghold. 100,000 people were also ordered to leave the north. In the meantime, the White House has condemned the burning of an aid convoy bound for Gaza by Israeli settlers. No food has made it through southern Gaza's 2 main border crossings in the past week. Harvard University reached an agreement with student protesters today to end the pro-Palestinian encampment in the school's Harvard Yard. As part of the deal, university officials agreed to address calls for divestment and will begin the process of reinstating suspended students. The latest reading on U.S. wholesale prices shows that inflation remains stubbornly high. The Labor Department said today that its producer price index rose 0.5% from March to April, that is more than expected. Compared to last April, prices were up 2.2%, the biggest increase in a year. The reading tracks price changes before they reach consumers and are a good barometer of where overall inflation is heading. And on Wall Street today, worries over that wholesale data were offset by comments from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who downplayed any talk of a possible interest rate hike. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 126 points to close at 39,558. The Nasdaq rose nearly 123 points to close at a record high. The S&P 500 tacked on 25 points. And a literary passing of note. Alice Munro has died. The Canadian literary giant and Nobel laureate was a master of the short story and one of the most esteemed writers of her time. Munro's best-known fiction included The Beggar Maid and Corrie. In a statement, her Canadian publisher said, quote, Alice Munro is a national treasure, adding that her work leaves an indelible mark on our literary landscape. She'd been in poor health for years and often spoke of retirement, including in this clip from 2006.
The thing about stopping writing, I say it with perfect honesty. I believe in it. You know, I believe that there's such a thing as a normal life, and that I am going to find it someday.
Fortunately for us, she kept writing. Her last work, a collection called Dear Life, came out in 2012. Alice Munro was 92 years old. Still to come, on the News Hour, the Biden administration seeks to change protections for migrant children in government custody. The editors from 2 digital-only community news sites talk about winning the Pulitzer Prize. And a look at the feud between rappers Kendrick Lamar and Drake.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West.
And you can watch more brief but spectacular videos online at pbs.org/newshour/brief. And join us again back here tomorrow night for Judy Woodruff's report from Arizona on how diversity in the Latino community can help moderate our divided moment.
Tonight, the combative cross-examination as Donald Trump's defense team gets its chance to grill his former fixer, Michael Cohen. The defense going after Michael Cohen's credibility, accusing him of being motivated by revenge, and confronting him about his own social media attacks on Mr. Trump. The tense questions coming after Cohen detailed a 2017 White House meeting where Mr. Trump allegedly agreed to reimburse him for the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. The jury seeing the checks. Also, the pressure Cohen says he felt from the former president not to flip on him, and how Cohen says his family finally convinced him to turn on his old boss. Also tonight, a horrifying crash in Florida, a bus carrying farm workers colliding with a pickup. At least 8 are dead, dozens injured. Now the truck driver accused of DUI and facing charges. Just out, the first NTSB report on that Baltimore bridge collapse. What happened on that ship before impact? President Biden announcing sweeping new tariffs on China's goods, including raising the tax on their electric cars to 100%. NBC News investigates the battle between the church and a library at a place known as the hometown of Superman.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. The gloves came off today in the criminal trial of Donald Trump as the defense got its chance to question former Trump lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen.
Here now with more. Trump's legal spokesperson, Alina Habas, was in the courtroom today. Alina, let's get your overall take.
As I'm sitting there today, Sean, all I keep thinking is they've sold tickets to all the Democrats in America who have Trump derangement syndrome for a show that, frankly, when the curtain opened, just didn't happen. So I hope you all get a refund. That is what is happening right now. And the only thing I'm hearing is accusations of somebody who paid their lawyers to hide something. We haven't heard that yet, by the way. Do you know who did pay their lawyers to hide something, Sean? Hillary Clinton with the Russia hoax. And the FEC investigated, and she had to pay a fine, $8,000, something like that. There was no trial. You know why? Because this is election interference. Do not get it twisted. What we are seeing is 100% them afraid that Trump is and probably will beat them. He is beating them in court. He is not campaigning, and it is petrifying everybody that has done wrong against any Republican and, frankly, Americans in this country. It's a joke.
All right, so where do you see the trial as you sit there every day? And again, unless you can identify it for me, I don't even know what the second charge is. I've yet to see any evidence that Donald Trump committed any crime. Every respectable legal scholar that I know, even people on fake news CNN and in the mainstream mob media, they're recognizing as a matter of law, there is no case. However, what is the reality that you're facing, the president is facing, and everybody's facing? And that is a New York City jury, where 9 out of 10 New Yorkers are registered Democrats, and most don't like Donald Trump and didn't vote for him in 2020. So that's the reality of what he's facing. I don't think this was a fair venue. I don't think he can get a fair trial. I don't think this is a fair judge. And I think it's all playing out the way probably Alvin Bragg hoped it would.
Well, that's 100% right. They intentionally choose these venues. If you look at all the venues that he's been carried and indicted into, they're all blue areas, right? D.C. Look at what's happening with Fannie. And we're slowly, like I said, the curtain opens and there's no show. And we have to peel it open like that. But the key is that we have to make sure that the jury is listening. And the jury is applying law to fact. Because there's been a lot of noise, Sean, but there has not been any proof of any wrongdoing. There has not been any proof that President Trump, who was in the White House, knew what an accountant was booking a payment to a lawyer as a legal expense. Which, by the way, isn't wrong. But they want to make you feel like it's wrong. They'll put in noise. They'll bring in witnesses that are salacious. They will do that on and on and on. And if the jury is not capable of listening to that jury instruction and really listening to limiting instructions and able to block out testimony that frankly shouldn't have come in, we're going to have a problem. But I'll tell you right now, President Trump has done nothing wrong, and they have not proven their case as I sit here today on day 17.
Let me ask you this. There's been some speculation as to how many witnesses the defense will call. I've even heard maybe one, maybe not any, maybe as many as 10. Can you give us any insight as to what the thinking is?
Well, Sean, as you know, I am Team Trump. I support my defense team ad nauseum, and they're doing amazingly. But if I were to divulge anything about our strategy, I'd frankly be unethical, much like some of the people we've been hearing from in the news. And I'd also be just frankly a bad attorney. So I'll let you sit tight.
Me for asking.
No, I cannot.
Okay, Alina, we appreciate you, as always, being with us. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interview.
You're watching Daybreak here on France 24. Welcome to the show. I'm Haxi Myers-Balkin. These are today's headlines. Thousands of protesters take the streets of Tbilisi after lawmakers approve a foreign influence law designed, say its critics, to stifle dissent. The US saying it's deeply troubled by the new legislation. Thousands of Palestinians marched through the ruins of former Palestinian villages to commemorate the Nakba, and Palestinians were expelled from lands that became part of the State of Israel in 1948. That as a quarter of Gazans have been displaced yet again in the past week, as Israel intensifies its operations across the enclave. And schools remain shut and the main airport is still closed in New Caledonia after 3 days of violent unrest in the French Pacific territory, sparked by constitutional reform approved here in Paris. 130 people have so far been arrested. Great to have you with us today. Also coming up in the programme, an honorary Palme d'Or for Meryl Streep at the opening of the 77th edition of the Cannes Film Festival. The jury this year headed up by Barbie director Greta Gerwig, the first American female filmmaker to serve as jury president. In defiance of weeks of mass protests, the Georgian parliament has approved a deeply divisive foreign influence law, a move which saw thousands of young Georgians take to the streets of Tbilisi once again. Critics say the law is an almost carbon copy of repressive Russian legislation, which severely undermines Georgia's long-held aspirations to become a member of the European Union. Laurent Bersica reports.
It triggered some of the largest protests in the country's history. Yet Georgia's prime minister said the foreign influence law, which was passed by parliament on Tuesday, reflected the will of the majority, and therefore of the people.
When the opposition convinces its supporters of something and they go out in the streets to protest, it's an absolutely normal and healthy event. But the political minority cannot under any circumstance force the majority to accept or reject a decision.
Earlier in the day, scuffles broke out in Parliament between ruling party and opposition MPs as the law was approved in its third reading. The announcement was met with outrage by a crowd gathered outside the building, yet many vowed to keep up their protest movement.
They say that it's democracy, and this is like nothing like democracy. They're hitting people, they're being violent, I don't know, I'm so angry. I don't even can explain. We're going to be here every day, all day, like, I won't give up.
Critics say the law, which requires media and advocacy groups receiving over 20% of their funding from abroad to register as pursuing the interests of a foreign power, can easily be abused to silence dissent, and fear it will see Georgia drift closer to Russia. Both Brussels and Washington have repeatedly warned it could derail the country's EU membership bid and affect relations with the West.
This weekend, we saw some of the largest protests in Georgia's history, with tens of thousands of peaceful protesters. If this legislation passes, it will compel us to fundamentally reassess our relationship with Georgia.
A small if. Georgia's president said she would refuse to sign off on the bill, but her veto can easily be overridden by another vote in Parliament.
The Ukrainian army says it's pulled back to new defensive positions in 2 areas in the northeastern Kharkiv region. Russia continues to pummel the area after opening a new front in the war on Friday. Moscow now says it's taken 10 border villages. Kyiv on Tuesday also warning that Russian forces were amassing to the north near Ukraine's Sumy region. Meanwhile, during a surprise visit to Kyiv, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken vowed that once the war is over, Russia will be forced to pay for the reconstruction of its neighbour. Let's take a listen.
There's one more crucial step that we can take, making Russia pay for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. What Putin destroyed, Russia should and must pay to rebuild. It's what international law demands. It's what the Ukrainian people deserve. Our Congress has given us the power to seize Russian assets in the United States. We intend to use it.
Well, for more on the situation on the ground in Ukraine, here's Lauren Best.
Minutes after a Russian strike, this residential building in the Kharkiv city center was barely left standing. In the street below, experts were cautiously removing an S-300 missile, the only one that didn't explode.
These are guided aerial munitions that were launched from Russian territory. There are no military targets here. It's an ordinary residential area. They are just terrorizing the population.
Kharkiv's mayor said the city was hit by at least 5 bombs on Tuesday, marking one of the most destructive days since the start of Moscow's renewed offensive on the region. The assault, which began on May 10th, has opened a new front in the 2-year conflict, forcing thousands of people to evacuate as Russian troops captured a string of villages in the area. The Ukrainian army said it had to pull back from 2 positions in the northeast on Tuesday, but troops were still trying to hold off Moscow's advance until the delivery of promised Western military aid, which was expected to take several more weeks.
The next 2 months will be the most difficult. After that, we will have a completely different situation on the battlefield.
Kharkiv's position near the Russian border has allowed Moscow to attack it from its own territory. And while it's massed up to 70,000 troops in the region, analysts say that won't be enough to capture a city the size of Kharkiv. They warn Russia could simply be trying to pile pressure on already depleted and overstretched Ukrainian forces.
Clashes between the Israeli army and Hamas militants in northern Gaza are the fiercest they've been in months, as Israel continues to pummel an area it had previously declared Hamas-free. Israel also continuing to push yet further into Rafah, where it says it's killed 100 militants since launching its ground operation in the southern Gaza city. Now, UN agencies estimate that around a quarter of Gaza's total population of 2.4 million people have been displaced yet again over the past 7 days, amid a worsening humanitarian crisis. Empty trucks are queuing on the Gazan side of the Egyptian border, with no indication of when they'll be allowed to pick up supplies. Let's take a listen.
We're waiting for a signal from the aid agencies. We're supposed to pick up aid for our families from the Israeli side, as well as goods for the private sector. As you can see, we're here working under the airstrikes and bombs, but we're withstanding all of it to try and help our citizens.
According to official sources, US President Joe Biden's administration informed Congress on Tuesday of a $1 billion weapons package for Israel. This just 1 week after threatening to withhold arms over concerns over a full-scale ground operation in Rafah. Well, for more, we can cross live now to our Washington correspondent, Fraser Jackson. Fraser, is this the White House reversing course on its stance?
In a word, no. Joe Biden, when he gave that interview to CNN last week, which was what really kicked all of this off and caused the big hoo-ha on Capitol Hill, Joe Biden was very clear that he said he would withhold these offensive weapons, the 2,000-pound bombs that were capable of flattening city blocks, and he said had been responsible for the death of many civilians. But he also said that he would still provide Israel with the money that it needs to defend itself, including the Iron Dome system, and also to defeat Hamas as well. That is another line that has been reiterated by numerous people who work at the White House, including John Kirby, the communications advisor to the National Security Council, and the National Security Advisor himself on Monday, saying that the US would still be giving Israel all of the money that was passed on Capitol Hill just last month. That's then about $14 billion. It is unclear at the moment whether this $1 billion tranche is going to be coming out of that $19 billion, or whether this was another piece of a weapons deal which hasn't yet been fulfilled. There was talk that other shipments, including the one that had been postponed last week, could also be halted, but so far there's no word as to whether any of those have been stopped. So we're still trying to figure out where this money is coming from, but reports suggest that it is going to be about $700 million worth of tank shells. And now that is interesting because Joe Biden said in that interview with CNN again that he could hold those back as well if Israel went into the southern town of Rafah in Gaza. But so far, the White House saying that the Netanyahu administration hasn't crossed Joe Biden's red line yet. There's also $500 million worth of tactical vehicles in this, and also about $60 million worth of mortar rounds as well. So the US is still continuing to provide this ammunition to the Israelis for now, and of course, of that $14 billion that was given to Israel, about $4 billion of that going to the Iron Dome defense systems, which are still needing to be replenished from Hamas rocket attacks.
Fraser Jackson reporting live there from Washington. Thank you very much. Just one day after Israelis celebrated their country's National Day, thousands of people have taken part in an annual march through the ruins of villages that Palestinians were expelled from during the 1948 war that led to the creation of the State of Israel. Palestinians call that mass expulsion the Nakba, or the catastrophe. This year's Nakba commemorations taking place as the war in Gaza has displaced the vast majority of Palestinians in the enclave.
We lived through the Nakba not just once, we were displaced several times. Palestinian exile, we lived through it not just once but several times. In 2014 we were displaced, in 2008 we were displaced, in 2022 we were displaced. I was a child in 1967 as well, and the circumstances were very difficult.
After Michael Cohen drew a direct line between Donald Trump and hush money payments in court on Monday, on Tuesday the former president's lawyers got their first stab at the trial's star witness, presenting Cohen as an untrustworthy narrator out for revenge after spending time behind bars for crimes that stemmed from his time as Trump's personal fixer. The French Riviera was awash with sequins, satins and suits last night as the 77th edition of the Cannes Film Festival officially got underway. An early special honour was given to the American actress Meryl Streep, presented by fellow star Juliette Binoche, just two of a host of the world's biggest stars who flocked to the Côte d'Azur for the event, which will be running until the 25th of May.
Change the way we look at women. In the cinema. You change the way we look at women in the cinema world. And also helping us to look at ourselves differently.
To you, every one of you in the audience, because I'm just so grateful that you haven't gotten sick of my face, that you haven't gotten off of the train.
France 24's film critic Liesl Nesselson takes us through the opening of the Glitzius event in the French cultural calendar now.
Greta Gerwig, director of Barbie and independent film star, will lead a jury that will give the Golden Palm, the Palme d'Or, in 11 days from now to one of the 22 films in competition, 14 of which are by directors who have competed before. That's fine with me because it means they know how to make a movie. Everything is wide open for the moment, but everyone's looking forward to some very interesting sounding movies. This evening, an honorary Golden Palm was given to Meryl Streep, sort of a career achievement award from the hands of Juliette Binoche. Obviously, the two women have a mutual admiration society, and that was lovely to see. There was a standing ovation that went on ridiculously long, but that was obviously heartfelt. And Meryl Streep said that when she came to Cannes 35 years ago with A Cry in the Dark, she was 40 years old and she assumed her career was over because women didn't usually get to go on acting after that age. Thank goodness in her case she did. And she also thanked not only her agent, but the man who has been doing her hair and makeup for 50 years.
French President Emmanuel Macron has appealed for calm in New Caledonia as violent unrest continues to rock the French overseas territory. Over 130 people have been arrested in the South Pacific archipelago in recent days. Pro-independence forces angered by recent constitutional reform now approved here in Paris. Here's French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal speaking on Tuesday.
I invite New Caledonia's political leaders to take France's outstretched hand and come to Paris for discussions in the coming weeks. The important thing is a return to calm. The important thing is dialogue. The important thing is to build a common political and global solution. Violence is neither justifiable nor tolerable. Violence has never forced anyone's hand. It has never enabled dialogue.
A massive manhunt is underway here in France after Mohamed Ambra, a convicted drug trafficker jailed last week, was set free. On Tuesday, a group of armed men attacked a prisoner transport vehicle he'd been travelling in. 2 prison officers were killed in that attack and 2 others are now receiving urgent medical care. Antonia Kerrigan has the latest.
After a prisoner transport vehicle came under attack at the Incarville toll booth, a fellow road user filmed what he saw. 2 police officers on the ground, shot dead at point-blank range, and 3 more injured.
2 vehicles rammed the van at Incarville toll booth. The men were armed with pump-action rifles. It was an organized attack.
The prisoner, 30-year-old Mohamed Amra, serving time for theft with breaking and entering, escaped during what was the first lethal attack on prison officers in France since 1992. The Minister for Justice has promised that the punishment will fit the crime.
I want to say that everything will be done to find the perpetrators of this despicable crime. These are people for whom life means nothing. They will be arrested. They will be judged. They will be punished commensurate with the crime they have committed.
The National Assembly held a minute of silence in honour of the victims of the attack and the bereaved. One left behind a wife and 2 children, the other a wife 5 months pregnant.
Now, that deadly prison van escape in northern France comes as the country's Senate has delivered a report on the local illegal drugs trade. Its conclusion, France is being overwhelmed by an influx of illegal drugs. A number of changes have been recommended to better fight this flourishing marketplace. James Vecina and our colleagues at France 2 report.
Legal drugs have flooded French society. Cannabis use is constantly on the rise, while cocaine is now soaring, and legal highs could be next. With an increasing number of different drugs available on the market, authorities are often unable to keep up with their flow via the many transit routes used by gangs in the country.
Not one department, be it customs, police, intelligence officers, or any other service, has confirmed that the means they have today are sufficient to keep up the fight against drugs.
A lack of staff and appropriate technology, as well as loopholes in the country's judicial system, mean that the drugs trade in France generates between 3 and 6 billion euros every year.
These weaknesses show that trafficking isn't taken into consideration as much as it should be. If we'd measured the risk properly, we'd have much better means in France today.
As a result, the Commission recommends that France creates an anti-drugs prosecutor's office, as well as a new agency based on the DEA, the United States Drug Enforcement Administration. It's also highlighted corruption in the country and called for better international cooperation, this in an effort to reach the drug lords, who most of the time seek refuge abroad, far from the trafficking that takes place in France.
If you're just joining us for Daybreak, a reminder of our top stories today. Thousands of protesters take the streets of Tbilisi after lawmakers approve a foreign influence law designed, say its critics, to stifle dissent. The US saying it's deeply troubled by the new legislation. Thousands of Palestinians marched through the ruins of former Palestinian villages to commemorate the Nakba, when Palestinians were expelled from land that became part of the State of Israel in 1948. That as a quarter of Gazans have been displaced yet again in the past week, as Israel intensifies its operations across the enclave. And schools remain shut and the main airport closed in New Caledonia after 3 days of violent unrest in the French Pacific territory, sparked by constitutional reform approved here in Paris. 130 people have been arrested. It's time now for today's Focus Report. As the Cannes Film Festival gets underway, we turn our focus to Japanese pop culture. Studio Ghibli has...
Prime Minister and Ministers, tonight from 7:45 p.m. on CNA and on 5.
This is Asia Now.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Alekia Selvaraju at this hour. Singapore turns the page on a historic chapter. The country will inaugurate Lawrence Wong as its new Prime Minister as Lee Hsien Loong steps down after 20 years in office. China and Russia set to shore up a no-limits partnership both leaders declared more than 2 years ago. Russian President Vladimir Putin will meet Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to reinforce ties and push back against growing challenges from the West. And the Biden administration will reportedly send more than $1 billion in additional arms and ammunition to Israel. The shipment is the first to be revealed since Washington put another arms transfer on hold, citing concern for civilian casualties in Gaza. Singapore welcomes its new Prime Minister today. Lawrence Wong will be the country's 4th PM, taking over from outgoing Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. CNA Sherlyn has more from outside the Istana, where the swearing-in ceremony will take place tonight.
A momentous day here in Singapore as we will soon witness the passing of the PM baton to current DPM Lawrence Wong. It's been 20 years since the last political leadership transition, and that was when outgoing PM Lee Hsien Loong first took on the role from Mr. Goh Chok Tong. I'm right outside the Istana where the Prime Minister's office is located. In fact, it was here just 2 days ago when Mr. Wong held a press conference to announce his new cabinet that will also be sworn in alongside him later today. That includes his 2 deputies, Mr. Gan Kim Yong and Mr. Heng Swee Kiat. Mr. Gan will be new to the role of DPM and will also be acting PM in the event of Mr. Wong's absence in the future. Meanwhile, Mr. Heng has been DPM since 2019 to the outgoing Mr. Lee. Both of them have laid out their readiness to support the new Prime Minister as Mr. Wong takes on the top job to lead Singapore. Most of the other ministerial appointments remain, while Mr. Wong's also promoted and appointed some younger office holders. Outgoing PM Lee will also take on the role of senior minister. Mr. Wong framed these moves as balancing the need for continuity, stability and renewal. These members will form Mr. Wong's first government and will get the first glimpse of this team together tonight at the ceremony. A full agenda awaits them as Mr. Wong has previously laid out. Among the priorities he's listed include keeping Singapore safe and secure and to tackle immediate concerns around the cost of living and jobs. All this amid the uncertain geopolitical climate and increasingly competitive global economy. Mr. Wong's trademark Forward SG campaign is also expected to kick up a notch to translate into concrete programs to benefit Singaporeans. He spent over a year consulting the wider public alongside the 4G leadership team, and with more issues set to be tied closely between the economy and society, Mr. Wong has said he will also work closely with his 2 deputies and other ministers to review and coordinate policies across multiple fronts. We can also anticipate outgoing Mr. Lee taking on quite a supportive role. He has said that he will do his best to help his successor, even as Mr. Wong leads in his own way. Mr. Lee has been preparing this handover for a very long time and has expressed confidence in Mr. Wong that he's ready to lead Singapore.
And we have lots more coverage on Mr. Wong's journey to the top job on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app, including this commentary on how double-hatting as Prime Minister and Finance Minister could give him an advantage before the next general election is called. Incoming Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says he's prepared to re-examine all of Singapore's fundamental assumptions in order to take the country forward. Mr. Wong was speaking to the media ahead of his appointment, covering topics ranging from politics to his career. Sherlyn again with this report.
It was first in the civil service that Mr. Lawrence Wong found his calling. Nearly 30 years on and on the cusp of becoming Prime Minister, it could easily not have been.
When I started working, I was an economist in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. I had been rejected by the Public Service Commission to be in the administrative service, so I wasn't involved in a lot of policy work. My work was largely around economic analysis. And when I was looking at myself, I was looking at friends around me and other schoolmates and peers. I figured, look, I can do economics work in the government. I can do exactly the same kind of economics work in the private sector too, and they are paying better. So the thought did cross my mind, maybe I should just leave and join a private sector, maybe a bank. But at that time, I also had very good bosses in the civil service. Khaw Boon Wan happened to be my first permanent secretary in MTI, and then Lim Seong Guan in finance, and they persuaded me to stay on.
A candidate we'd like to introduce today is Sir Lawrence Wong.
In 2011, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong invited him to join politics. It has meant Mr. Wong's personal life has been open to scrutiny.
The good thing in Singapore is that I think where politics is concerned, while there is exposure, while you have to put yourself up to the public, and there's less privacy, I think generally we keep families out of it. Families are separate. Our families didn't choose to be politicians. We are the ones who took the step forward.
The road to the Istana was not always on the cards for Mr. Wong. After Heng Swee Keat stepped aside as leader of the 4G, the process to select a new first among equals began. Former Minister Khaw Boon Wan conducted interviews among the 4G leaders. At the end of his conversation with Mr. Wong, Mr. Khaw told him that a consensus is emerging. Mr. Wong did not know what it meant then. He was only told he would succeed PM Lee at the tail end of the process.
I was surprised when I went back home to tell my wife. She was surprised too. But we had been prepared for it because she knew I was part of this process, and we knew that going into this we would accept the outcome of the process, and if this is the result, then I would step up and I'll take on the responsibility.
With that responsibility comes a commitment to, quote, re-look traditional approaches. Through the consultative Forward SG movement, policies such as reclassifying new public housing estates to make them more inclusive and improving skills future to incentivize more people to upgrade their capabilities have been rolled out.
We are prepared to re-examine all our assumptions and consider under different circumstances, different societal expectations and needs, how might we do things different. Soon we will be announcing the new details of the unemployment benefit scheme, which we talked about, which, we in the past had said this was not something we would do. But again, now under different circumstances, recognizing that the economic environment is going to be more volatile, that the pace of change will be faster, technological advancements are continuing, and therefore jobs will be disrupted more and more, we feel it's necessary to have some support system in place. So it's one illustration of how we are prepared to re-examine all our fundamental assumptions and consider ultimately what's the best way to take Singapore forward.
When it comes to difficult topics like decriminalizing gay sex or the wearing of the tudung in workplaces, Mr. Wong says the government will continue to play the role of a facilitator.
I'm sure, where there will be different views among different segments of the community. And in some of these instances, not all, in some of these instances, the government doesn't necessarily have to lead from the front. Because some of these instances, the social norms have to evolve more organically. The government, therefore, its role is not so much to say this is the way, but to facilitate, to bring people together, to find consensus on how best to move forward as a people.
Even as the government takes in diverse views for nation building, Mr. Wong recognizes that there is greater appetite for political contestation. It will be among the things he considers as he prepares to lead the ruling People's Action Party into an impending general election. A mandate, he says, is needed to look after the people's interests.
If in the next election, the contest is fiercer and we were to lose just a few percentage points, it is not unimaginable for 2 or maybe 3 opposition parties to come together, form a coalition and run the government. Get more than 50%. Not at all unimaginable. And that's why when I said that I do not assume that PAP will win the next election or that I will automatically be the PM after the election, I say that seriously. This is the reality of our political situation today. It is no longer dominance, I am.
More than 7 months into the Gaza war, Israel appears far from wiping out Hamas. It acknowledges it is now fighting battles on multiple fronts.
נכון לעכשיו, נלחמות בעזה 3 אוגדות, ב3 מוקדים שונים.
اتجاه مختلف حتى نصل إلى نتيجة مختلفة. الآن نحن نمر بحالة
US President Joe Biden is taking the first step towards getting a new arms deal for Israel. Reports say he has informed Congress that the package will be worth $1 billion. It would come out of a mega $95 billion foreign aid bill that he signed into law recently, which passed bipartisanly in Congress. It benefits Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. The president is carving out a new deal after warning Israel he might withhold some weapons if it launched a full-scale attack on Rafah. And just last week, his administration confirmed that it halted a shipment of arms, including heavy bombs, fearing their devastating impact on civilians. Well, the Wall Street Journal says the latest package would include tank, ammunition, tactical vehicles, and mortar rounds. Congress could still block the sale as left-leaning Democratic members are angry about the Gaza war's toll on civilians. And your Asia Business Update is coming up next with Henry Yin. Chinese equities struggling this morning, Henry?
Yes, all right, Ella. So investors are weighing the impact of the latest round of Washington's tariff increases on Chinese goods. And later, some TikTok creators in the US filing suit to try to stop a law which would ban the video sharing platform in the country.
A new needs-based funding system so that students from disadvantaged backgrounds and students who study in regional Australia get the extra support that they need to succeed when they get there. We know that students from disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to finish their degree than other students, and this is all about fixing that, giving them extra academic support and extra wraparound support. Bob Hawke and Paul Keating saw an increase in the number of kids finishing high school from 40% to almost 80%. That was nation-changing stuff. This is the next step. In the budget, we've set a target that by 2050, 80% of our workforce hasn't just finished school, but they've gone to TAFE or university as well. And to hit that target, we've got to help more young people from the outer suburbs and the regions to get to uni and to succeed when they get there. And that's what these reforms are about. Fee-free, uni-ready courses, uncapping places, and needs-based funding. More spots and more support. Opening the door of opportunity for more Australians. This is the sort of change, the sort of reform that helps to make sure that no one's held back and no one's left behind.
call to member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Treasurer. The budget papers project a structural deficit across the medium term into the 2030s. This is unsustainable. What is the Treasurer's plan to return to a structural budget balance, and when will this be?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Wentworth for her question, which reflects her long-standing interest in budget policy, in particular, in her case, tax reform. One of the most important reasons why the progress that we've made so far in budget repair is so important is because if you look at the two fastest growing areas of government spending, which is feeding that structural deficit to which the member rightly refers, the two fastest growing areas of spending were the interest on the debt that we inherited from those opposite, the first one, and the second one has been the NDIS. And we have taken considered methodical action to address both of those areas, two of the big drivers. I pay tribute to the Minister Shorten, for the work that we do together on the NDIS, which recognises that we need to ensure that the NDIS continues to deliver for the people it was designed to help, and we need to do that in a way not by cutting back spending, by managing the growth of that spending. So I pay tribute to him. And when it comes to the contribution of debt interest to the structural deficit, that spends considerable as well. And one of the reasons why it's so important, we've been able to shave that $150 billion of debt this year, is because it does save us something like $80 billion in debt interest over the course of the next 10 years. And you can see $80 billion does make a meaningful difference to the structural position of the budget in the medium term as well. So those are two things that we are doing. There's also an important role, and I think the member for Wentworth would acknowledge this, even if she may have a different combination of proposals when it comes to tax reform, but there is a role for tax reform in that too. Before the Parliament, we've got changes to the PRRT, we've got changes to high balance superannuation. That's why it makes it so ironic. Those opposite are asking about billionaires when they are voting against some of these fairness measures in the tax system in the other place. But tax reform has a role to play as well, and in last night's budget there was more tax reform. And I acknowledge that the member for Wentworth would like us to go further and faster on tax reform, but that doesn't mean that it has been absent. We've been working through a really comprehensive tax reform agenda in a methodical and considered way. The changes last night, there were some compliance changes. There's obviously a tax cut for every taxpayer to return bracket creep in the best possible way. There's also small business tax incentives. There's tax incentives to make ourselves a renewable energy superpower. And there's also other important changes like the changes to capital gains taxes for foreign property owners. That's another change that's in the budget. So all of this together, Mr Speaker, the very responsible approach that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the Government take to managing the budget is all about improving the structural position over time. We've done a whole heap of that and we've made some good progress, but we know that there is more to do.
The call to member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How will small businesses benefit from the targeted support in last night's budget, and what could be standing in its way?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homeless and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the wonderful member for Macquarie. The member for Macquarie has been a long-standing supporter of small business because, of course, she's been a small business owner herself, Mr Speaker. And she understands how important it is that we put downward pressure on inflation because of the input costs of small businesses, Mr Speaker. Indeed, we know that Australia's 2.5 million small businesses have been doing it tough, which is why we are providing targeted support in this year's budget. We know that they employ over 5 million Australians and, importantly, contribute $500 billion to our economy each and every year, Mr Speaker. So it's critical that they get the support that they need when we have those cost of living pressures. Indeed, it's laid out in our small business statement, Mr Speaker. That is part of the budget. It's $640 million in targeted support for small businesses. It starts, of course, with an extension, a 12-month extension to the $20,000 instant asset write-off that hopefully those across the other side there will be supporting, Mr Speaker, because, of course, you want to spend more now over there. Is that what I've just heard, Mr Speaker, from the Shadow Treasurer over there? He wants to spend more. He wants to spend more. OK. So we're providing $290 million in cash flow support through this instant asset write-off, and indeed, they will be able to write off each asset up to $20,000. Those businesses with an annual turnover of less than $10 million. So it is targeted, Mr Speaker, because we do need to put downward pressure on inflation. And of course, we also have, as the Minister for Energy has said, energy bill relief for small businesses. Around 1 million small businesses will be getting additional energy bill relief. And of course, last time we had energy bill relief for support for small businesses, those opposite voted against it, Mr Speaker. Another measure that small businesses can benefit from that this time I hope they're going to support when small businesses need this targeted support, Mr Speaker. Around 1 million businesses will be getting an additional $325 to help them with their
Earmarked for demolition, but now collapsed. At least 4 people have been rescued from the rubble of a collapsed building in the Mathare neighborhood of Kenya's capital, Nairobi, on Tuesday. 3 of them were critically injured, while 1 person sustained minor injuries. Kenya's Red Cross has said more people were likely to be trapped. The building had been recently vacated and was ordered to be demolished as it was too close to a river, according to local authorities. Kenya has experienced unprecedented rains and flooding recently, prompting the government to order people to move to higher ground. This was one of the buildings ordered to be vacated. 1 person died in a similar incident on the 1st of May when a 4-story building under construction collapsed in Karia area, Kirinyaga County. It's the anniversary of independence in Tel Aviv. The day comes amid the months-long war in Gaza, but for these Israelis, it is time to celebrate. Firework displays were cancelled, but as with previous years, Israelis celebrated the day with barbecues, filling up entire parks across the country.
We don't want to show Hamas that they can win. We want to show them that we're strong, and we want to show them that our country is important for us, and to show them that we still go out, we still live our lives.
The state of Israel has been engaged in what has been relentless wars and conflict throughout its history. With the shock of October 7 Hamas attacks still raw, the country has had to deal with profound sadness and anger from across the world, particularly over its response. A heavily damaged school in Gaza. The school in the southern town of Khan Yunis was run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, known as UNRWA. Damaged in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, it now houses a group of displaced Palestinians from Rafah. The displaced families here cleaned some of the classrooms, removed debris and fixed the damage before settling in. They told us to evacuate the schools in Rafah, so we came to Muwasi in Khan Yunis, and here it is as you see it, complete destruction. The Jews entered it and destroyed it. No matter how much we clean it, we cannot shelter our children in it. No water, nothing. That's it over there, the burned school. We're unable to live in it. Israel has portrayed Rafah as the last stronghold of Hamas, brushing off warnings from the US and other allies. UNRWA says around 360,000 Palestinians have fled the city over the past week. We came to the schools to reclaim a place in which to settle as a shelter. We did not find a better place than it. There is no water, no electricity, and there is no life. And here you are. As you can see, we and the girls and boys try as much as we can, trying to look for shelter. Israel's offensive has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, according to Gaza's health ministry, which doesn't distinguish between civilians and combatants in its figures. Israel says it has killed over 13,000 militants without providing evidence.
Tonight, the combative cross-examination of Donald Trump's former fixer.
Do you plan to testify, Mr. Trump?
Trump's team attacks the credibility of Michael Cohen, the show of support from the Speaker of the House, trying to discredit the prosecution's key witness.
This is a man who is clearly on a mission for personal revenge.
The CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. We're going to get to the intense and contentious questioning of former fixer Michael Cohen by Donald Trump's defense team in just a moment. But first, there is some breaking news about a horrific accident in Florida. Now, a truck driver is under arrest for a DUI after a deadly crash that killed at least 8 people and injured 40 others in central Florida early this morning. State investigators say the driver of that pickup truck collided with a bus that was carrying 53 migrant farm workers. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez reports tonight on the conditions of those still in the hospital in Ocala.
More than 30 ambulances rushed to the scene of the crash at about 6:30 this morning. It happened on a rural road about 50 miles south of Gainesville. 53 farm workers were riding in a bus once used as a school bus when police say an oncoming pickup truck veered toward the center of the road. The two vehicles sideswiped.
The school bus traveled off the roadway onto the grass shoulder where it went through a fence, struck a tree, and overturned. We've had approximately 40 people transported to local area hospitals.
Brian McLean Howard, the driver of the pickup truck, has been arrested on 8 counts of driving under the influence, manslaughter. Migrant workers from Mexico were among the victims. They were in the U.S. legally, according to government officials, and were on their way to a farm that was harvesting watermelons.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Have a good life.